Alright guys, we're going to try doing pattern number 8. This one's actually kind of tricky, and I've even had to record this video a few times to get this one to look right. But at its heart, this is really just a bunch of hexagon patterns. And once we can kind of use our edge detects and kind of figure out how to build this one hexagon shape, the repeating process of like tiling it is going to be pretty easy. So the big challenge is just understanding how to do this shape at all. So let's try it out. I'm going to start off by using a polygon. Now I am going to scale this in a little bit because just in case I end up doing any edge detects on this guy to kind of make the border, I don't want that edge detect to kind of freak out when it hits the edge of the frame because that tends to cause some artifacts. So I'm just going to bring this down to about 0.9 scale, and let's just throw the edge detect on there immediately. We're going to bring down the roundness, we'll invert it so it's a white outline just like the reference, and we'll maybe thicken that up to like a 3, maybe a 4. I think I'm going to stick with 3. Alright, so there's the outline. Now the next thing we've got to do is get these kind of lines crossing through it. This actually isn't too bad. To do this, if I duplicate the polygon, we're going to put this below it. There's a setting on here called explode. And if I move the explode up, you can see where it's almost tearing apart the polygon into the individual triangles. We're just going to move it apart a little bit, kind of like this. We're going to then invert it, because remember the lines are white. Now I want to combine these together, and this is where it's going to get a little tricky, and it's also going to be important on how we layer them with the blend mode. So let's say that we have this going into the background, and this going into the foreground. You can see this is now covering that guy. And if I put it to a max, it's adding all that information together. Now the problem we're running into is like I kind of like the way it's going, but I don't want all this extra white. And somehow I have to figure out why that little black strip is there. Now this is where we can use the opacity, which is also very similar to a mask, on the blend. Think of this kind of like an alpha. This is going to tell it where it's adding these two images together. Now if I connect this into the opacity, watch the image. We'll see if we have any issues. Let's drag this down to opacity. You'll notice something happened, but it's not really fixing our problem. Let's back up. Delete these connections. Let's put this into the foreground, this into the background. So I'm just flipping the input order. Now it's still set to max lighten. It looks the same, but now watch what happens if I put this back into the opacity. So the only difference is me flipping those two guys right there. So here's it in opacity. So why did this work this time? It's because anytime you're using a opacity or some type of alpha, which is basically telling the blend where these are visible, kind of like all the different masks we've been using in Painter. But when you use this thing, because it's starting with this as the background, this is effectively cutting out a good chunk of this image. It's cutting out the outside. When it was flipped the wrong way around, it was treating this as a background, and this was accidentally cutting out the black on this thing, which was really not causing an issue to begin with. So this is a little confusing. It just takes a lot of practice getting used to like how blend modes work and alphas and how to connect things properly. But you can see in this particular case, the input order is going to be important. Now that I've kind of got this guy working, our next target is going to be getting these little pieces right here. So this looks like the same hexagon, but it's smaller, and there's 6 of them going around. So there's 1 in each corner. To do this, we're going to use something called splatter circular. Now what the splatter circular does is it'll either take one of the default patterns it comes with. Right now it's paraboloid, which is not very helpful. But it could also take an input pattern, and it will kind of like put that around the center point in different positions. So what I could do is take this polygon, our first one we did, connect that into the pattern input, and from here if I say use image input, you can see okay, we're kind of getting somewhere. Now how many do I need? It has to match up with each corner, so I have 6 corners in the hexagon. So we're going to take the pattern amount on the splatter to 6. And conveniently, they are hitting all the corners. It's not, I don't have to rotate it or anything. Now, I don't know if they're positioned right, so what we're going to do is first let's try to get an edge detect to kind of generate the outline, because remember, it's not just a opaque, thick hexagon. If you look at this guy, it's a border of a hexagon. So this also needs to go through an edge detect. And I'm going to use the same value we did over here. So it's all the same thickness. So that has a value of 3. We're going to invert this, take down the roundness, put this also to 3. Now I want to add them together and figure out how far off I am with the placement. Just going to move that back. We're going to do a blend. We're going to try to do a max blend with these two different images. This one and this one. The input order shouldn't matter for this. Okay, they are not in the right spot. But if I go back to splatter circular, there should be an offset. Let me check. It might be radius. Yep. Radius allows me to kind of move that out a little farther. And I also need to make these guys bigger. So let's see if I can figure that out real quick. Radius, ring multiplier, angle, spread, size. Okay, here we go. Scale. Let's bring that up. So we're going to go to right about maybe like that. I think this needs to be a little bigger. Maybe a scale of 2. And I think like my thickness is still a little off. The borders do feel slightly thicker in the reference now that I'm kind of looking at it. So I'm going to go to my edge detect and just boost all these guys up by 1 number. So we're going to go to 4. And now I kind of need to get this little line just a tiny bit thicker. That is my explode value on the other polygon. That feels a little closer. Okay, we're almost there. Now the last thing I'm kind of missing is I need to somehow cut out the excess junk around the outside, so I'm only left with that one polygon. Now I probably could take this initial shape, but if you kind of look at the outside here, see how I want to remove everything outside of this? If I only use this guy, I'm worried it's going to cut into the bevel a little bit. So I kind of want to get both of these images together so I have it positioned at the right spot, because it has to really stop right there, not too far in, not too far out. So what we're going to do is take both of these shapes, the original polygon and the edge detect, and we're going to add these together with a max lighten. So just kind of like pop that out a little bit thicker from that original shape. So this is now a slightly bigger polygon. Now the reason we're doing that is because now if I do a blend and I connect this guy into it, so I'm blending this bigger polygon with that, and if I do a multiply, see how that kind of removes the outside? And just to kind of show you the issue, like watch what happens if I had used the original polygon here. See how it kind of was eating into that thickness? So I'm trying to get the result of both of those guys so I don't lose any of that edge detect thickness I'd already set up. So I think we may have got the shape working. That looks correct. So from here, it should be pretty straightforward. We're going to do a tile generator. Okay, let's make sure this is going into the input. Set the pattern to use the image input. And let's just kind of quickly count this thing. 1, 2, 3, 6 across, and 8 down. Okay, so 6 by 8. And they have to be staggered. Okay, so we need to do a offset by 50%. So let's just type in 0.5. And from here, it's just a matter of scaling things up. I'm going to have to mess around with those interstice values again. Okay, right about there might be right. That looks pretty close. And this is a vertical issue. So once again, I need to go negative on the interstice. Right like that. There we go. There it is. Got it. This one was kind of tricky. So a lot of cool tricks we learned in this one. Mainly this guy, because we haven't had to use that splatter circular yet. But that's a pretty cool node, especially with this right here, because it just puts all those other hexagons in the exact perfect location around this other hexagonal shape.